topic of discussion is respiration. So let's come to the topic. Now if I ask you a question, what happens when you take food inside your body? Your answer would be digestion, right? So when food passes into a alimentary canal, it undergoes various kinds of catabolic reactions. In that reaction, that complex form of food is converted into simpler form, and that simpler form is absorbed by your blood, right? And now in blood in turn supply these simpler forms to the different tissues and different body cells, right? So that they can get energy from that food, right? So this respiration is related to that energy production which takes place in the cell or tissue, right? So what happens in this case, in which the oxidation of carbohydrates or oxidation of food which is taken by the tissue or cell occurs, so that a sufficient amount of energy is released along with some byproducts like carbon dioxide and water. So it is exclusively a kind of catabolic process where the breakdown takes place, right? And now this process takes place in the presence of oxygen in some organisms, but in some cases it takes place in the absence of oxygen. So we regard it as a oxidation of carbohydrates, right? Now here you can see the glucose undergo oxidation, produce energy and some byproducts like carbon dioxide and water. Glucose comes from the food, right? And oxygen also supplied by the blood via the process of breathing, right? Now next is the steps of respiration. Now what are the steps involved in the respiration? First of all, breakdown of glucose into pyruvate, and the second is the fate of pyruvate. Now first step takes place in the cytoplasm, where a 6-carbon glucose molecule gets broken down into 3-carbon pyruvic acid. Now this step is common in every organism, but in the second step where the pyruvic acid undergoes oxidation or undergoes catabolic reaction and form different products, right? So on this basis the respiration is of two types: aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. In aerobic respiration, the oxidative breakdown of respiratory substrates takes place in the presence of oxygen, right? And this process is known as aerobic respiration. Now in this case there is a complete breakdown of the pyruvic acid into carbon dioxide, water and 38 molecules of ATP, right, which is the energy currency of the cell, right? You can see from here the equation that I have mentioned over here. The glucose, first of all, glucose converted into pyruvic acid, and this process is known as glycolysis, and this occurs in the cytoplasm. In the next step, then when the pyruvic acid is converted into CO2, water and 38 ATP energy, this process takes place in the mitochondria, where oxygen is supplied, oxygen is required, and this process is known as oxidation process, right, where a sufficient amount of energy, that is 38 ATP molecules, are released, right? Now if we talk about the anaerobic respiration, as the name itself suggests, anaerobic means without air. So in this case the pyruvate gets broken down into various products, but in the absence of oxygen. In this case oxygen is absent, so in this case the pyruvate undergoes incomplete breakdown or partial breakdown, right, in which the end products may be lactic acid, it may be ethanol in case of different organisms. If we talk about in case of yeast, the pyruvate gets converted into ethanol, carbon dioxide and only 2 ATP molecules. So here the energy production is very less, right? And it occurs also in case of muscle cells, where pyruvate gets converted into lactic acid, right? Now here you can also see the first step where the glucose gets converted into pyruvate is similar in both the cases, aerobic as well as anaerobic respiration, but the next step where the pyruvate is converted into different products is differ, right? Now in case of anaerobic respiration, it gets converted, its partial breakdown takes place, but in case of aerobic there is a complete breakdown takes place, right? You can see over here, right? Now if we summarize, we can say aerobic takes place in the presence of oxygen, anaerobic takes place in the absence of oxygen. Aerobic, in this case mitochondria is involved, and anaerobic exclusively takes place in the cytoplasm. In aerobic, the end products of carbon dioxide, water, and anaerobic, the end products of maybe alcohol or lactic acid. In case of aerobic respiration, a more amount of energy is released, but in case of anaerobic, very little amount of, less amount of energy is released, right? Equation that we have already discussed. So this is all about. Thank you so much. Thank you guys.